you were to think, if your best friend came to you and said, I want to buy a house or I want to buy a property, literally without asking them another question, wouldn't you know basically what they were looking for without asking them anything else? That's the degree of knowledge you have to have with every person you put in your car. And you need to know that before you put them in your car. Now, there are three areas that you need to explore when you're qualifying a buyer. The first is financial. And the first area, financial, we'll talk about in just a second. The second is the buyer's wants and the buyer's needs. Now, it would seem that these two are the same, but they're really not, as you'll see in just a second. First of all, financial qualification, that's best left to the experts. The qualification, financial qualification, is in such an upheaval right now that interest rates are changing daily. And the way they're changing, it's just impossible for someone who isn't in that industry to do a qualified job when financially qualifying a buyer. Now, one thing that you should do in this area is make sure that the person that you're working with, your financial expert, that this person doesn't just qualify the buyer, but approves the buyer. So that when you actually present the contract, you're presenting the contract with a pre-approval letter. I've had people come to me quite often and say, well, no, I don't want to have somebody else pull my credit because it'll lower my financial score. I'm sure you've heard that before. Well, that's true if you're talking about a commercial loan or conventional loan or credit cards. But it is an absolute untruth when you're talking about mortgages. If somebody applies for a credit card, you get these credit card applications in the mail every day. If somebody applies for a credit card, then the expectation is that if you send it in and you're approved, that you're going to take it out. And so when the credit card company sends that to you, it says pre-approved, but if you'll notice, there's always a little asterisk there. And that asterisk basically is saying we have to check your credit. So they send it to Equifax or one of the credit agencies, and Equifax will look at this credit application, and let's say you're applying for a $5,000 credit card, they will immediately assign you $5,000 in debt. Even though you haven't received the credit card, even though you haven't spent the money, you're automatically, as far as Equifax is concerned, $5,000 in debt. And then you apply 2 weeks later for another credit card for $10,000, same thing is true. Because the basic assumption is that since you sent it in, if the credit card company approves you, you'll take that credit card. So they automatically assign that to you as a debt. Now, over a period of 1 year, as many times as your credit is checked, it cannot lower your financial FICO score by more than 5% in a 1 year period of time. But now let's talk about mortgages. How many mortgages will the average buyer take out in a 30-day period? And the obvious answer is 1. And so by federal law, a person, a consumer, can apply for as many mortgages as they want in that 30-day period, and it can count as only 1 hit against their credit. But you see, the buyers will come to you because they've been what is called pre-qualified by a mortgage expert, and they in turn will come to you and say, well, no, I was told don't let anybody pull my credit. Well, the mortgage broker is just telling them that because they don't want anybody else to give them a loan. You've got to explain to them that it is in their best interest to shop the mortgage. If you're working with a good financial institution, it's a good possibility that you can beat the rate of the other broker. The other thing to understand when the buyer comes to you and tells you that they've already been qualified, when they call, excuse me, just a minute, let's go back a second. Do you remember when you took your course, we call it in Florida Principles and Practices, but when you took your course to get your real estate license, they taught you the difference between a mortgage broker and a mortgage banker. Well, a mortgage banker has in-house funds. A mortgage broker is out the loan to any number of mortgage broker, or bankers rather. And so when somebody calls a mortgage broker, the broker will ask them questions, and then based on the information they receive, they will tell the consumer, okay, we can get you a loan for whatever at this interest rate and so on. But they have not yet placed that loan with what is called the underwriter. And the underwriter is the source of the funds. And until that loan is placed with the underwriter, that is not a pre-approved loan. It's a pre-qualified loan. The broker hasn't yet placed it. And so when you are applying for a loan with a mortgage banker, it's going to go directly to the underwriter, and if approved, then you'll get a financial approval letter. And that's the letter that you want to take with you when you go to the buyer, when you go to the seller to present the contract. Now let's talk a moment about the buyer's wants and their needs. First of all, a buyer's wants and what they were going to tell you they're looking for. This is what you'll hear on the phone. They'll say, I want a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with a pool in this neighborhood. And then, unfortunately, what they end up buying is a 4-2 on a canal in a totally different area. And the reason is because their needs. And their needs are the actual reasons why they buy. And in most cases, these reasons are psychological in nature. People don't buy bricks and mortar. They buy romance, prestige, safety for their family. Even ego and status come into play. What you need to do in this qualification process is to literally get inside the seller's head, the buyer rather's head, and start to look for property through their eyes, not through your eyes. This cost me, a number of years ago, cost me a lot of money. I was working with a buyer that was coming down from Chicago, and at that particular time I lived on a sailboat, and I loved the water, and I convinced this individual that he should buy something on the water. Well, the reason was that he had a boat in Chicago, a smaller boat. He was going to sell it and buy a bigger boat when he got down here. And so we were looking for water off the intercoastal and couldn't find the property for him. After about 6 months, I'd shown him everything that was available, and he couldn't find anything. And so I put him into a rental. He had been living in a hotel up to that point, and put him into a rental property, and I got a small commission on that. But about 2 months later, I found a property that I thought was ideal for him, and I called him. When I called, he said, Phil, I hate to tell you this, but I bought another house. I said, really? Great. Where'd you buy? Now, I don't know if you know Fort Lauderdale and that area, but there's an area quite a ways west of Fort Lauderdale, of the beach, that's called Coral Springs. And he said, I bought in Coral Springs. Well, Coral Springs is literally 25 miles away from the ocean, away from any water. I wouldn't live in Coral Springs on a bet, or at least I wouldn't at that time, because I lived on a sailboat. I wasn't looking through his eyes to find property. I was looking through my eyes. I was showing properties that I liked, not necessarily that fit his needs. I asked him, why did you buy, Coral Springs? He said, I went to my boss's house for a party. And he said, when I walked into his house, I realized what I really wanted. I said, what was that? And he said, well, I would have loved to have water, but I needed space. He had 5 kids. I was showing him properties in the $300,000 to $400,000 price range. A $300,000 to $400,000 waterfront home is going to be probably 2,500 to 3,000 square feet. The house he was having built was 7,000 square feet. And if I had asked him just one question, one simple question, when he was in Chicago before he ever came down, I never would have shown him a waterfront property. And that was simply, how big is the home that you have in Chicago? And it turned out, he told me that. After he told me that he was buying one that was 7,000. He said the house I had in Chicago was 6,200 square feet. Well, a 6,200 square foot waterfront home in Fort Lauderdale is going to cost you well over $1 million. And this person just couldn't afford $1 million home. So the point is, you need to look through their eyes. Look for properties that they're looking for, not necessarily properties that you're looking for. Now, there's another way of qualifying, and this is literally the wrong way to qualify a buyer, but too many associates really do this. And that is qualifying by what I call a process of elimination. What I mean by that is that they will hear what the buyer is saying they want. All of these wants right here. This is what they're saying they want on the phone. They'll listen to them and they'll say, okay, I'll meet you at the office tomorrow, let's say 10 o'clock, and I'll have some properties ready to be shown to you. So they arrive at the office at 10 o'clock, and then through a process of elimination, they're trying to zero in on the property that they think the buyer's going to like. And by the time they find a property, the buyer rather's lost interest, simply because they don't think the salesperson really even knows what they're looking for. So don't qualify a buyer by a process of elimination. You need to literally have an interview with this buyer before you show him property. Now, 2 questions. 1, how long should that interview take? And number 2, where interview? Now, the first part of this, as far as how long should it take, just a statement. The longer you take to qualify a buyer, the fewer homes you'll have to show. The longer you take to qualify a buyer, the fewer homes you'll have to show. But in actuality, at least 30 minutes, if not 60 minutes. Now, let's talk about the second aspect of this. Where should this interview take place? Most people would say, well, let's bring them into the office. Okay, that's fine. It sounds like a good idea. It's business and everything. But let me ask you this. Would this seem to be a rational or a normal question that you would ask a buyer? Mr. Buyer, would you like a manicured lawn? Wouldn't be a natural question, would it? But what if you drove over to their house and it looked as though their home, their lawn, was manicured with a pair of scissors? Would you show them a property where the lawn was in disarray and needed repair? So where's the best place to qualify a buyer, if at all possible, in their own home? When I say if possible, I'm speaking about logistics. If their house is 30 miles away from where they're going to be and you don't want to drive the 30 miles, it's fine. Bring them into the office. But if at all possible, qualify them in their home. When you qualify them in their house, just by opening their door, you're going to find out things you never, ever would have thought to ask questions about. And again, make sure that you take at least 30 minutes, if not 60. And this, again, is before you ever show them property.